Andrews could feel the creature was closer than ever. Then something moved. A low, vibrating sound echoed through the walls, and the lights on the ship began to flicker erratically. The organism, or what was left of it, had broken free and was now loose aboard the ship. Andrews was starting to realize that something was deeply wrong. The feeling of being watched was becoming impossible to ignore. He stopped for a moment in the middle of a narrow hallway, his feet firmly planted on the cold, silent floor of the ship. The echo of his own footsteps seemed to stretch into the emptiness, and the sound of his breath, now quickened, seemed louder than ever. The fear didn't come from anything he could see, but from an invisible presence, something in the air, something that slithered in the shadows. He took a few more steps, his hands sweating as he gripped the ship's control. Every room he passed seemed darker, more oppressive. The lights flickered frequently, almost as if the ship itself were trying to whisper old secrets. Secrets that Andrews shouldn't be uncovering. He glanced quickly to either side, but all he saw was silence and darkness. Then a growing sense of pressure settled on his chest, as though the very space around him was tightening. He felt as if the ship itself were alive, as if the walls were breathing around him. It was a fear that couldn't be rationalized. There were no sounds, no visible movements, but a primal instinct told him he was no longer alone. Andrews stopped in front of one of the ship's windows, the faint light of the stars illuminating his face, revealing the exhaustion that had built up from hours without rest. He stared into the infinite space ahead, trying to remember what had made him begin this mission, but his thoughts were in disarray. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger with each passing moment. He turned around, but the corridor was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. He took a step forward, trying to push away the discomfort that was rooting itself in his mind, but the air seemed thicker, colder. For a moment, the environment grew utterly silent, as if even the ship's systems had stopped working. The emptiness spread through every corner, a stillness so oppressive that Andrews felt his throat tighten. His eyes quickly scanned the room, examining every dark corner, every stained wall. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the distress signal or the records of the dead crew. It wasn't the fact that the ship was deserted. It was something far more visceral, something he couldn't fully understand, but he knew it was real. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel the presence, a vibration, almost as if the environment itself was adjusting to his perception, as if something was waiting for him. In a burst of instinct, he began to move faster, his steps now more hurried, heavier. He needed to get out of there. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, as though he were being followed with every movement. But whenever he looked back, there was nothing. In a rush, he activated the controls of the ship to return to his pilot's capsule. As he entered, he locked the door behind him, which gave him a false sense of security. But even there, seated before the control panel, with the ship safe and everything seemingly in order, a constant sense of unease kept him on edge. He knew something was there. Something was watching him, something that was studying him in some way, but never fully revealed itself. He didn't know how much longer he could endure, but it was clear to him the real danger wasn't in the abandoned ship, nor in the creatures he might have released. The real danger was in what was still watching him. The ship was quiet, but not peaceful. The tension seemed to build with every second that passed. Andrews could no longer ignore the feeling that something was around him, lurking in the shadows of the ship, watching his every move. The lights, which had been flickering intermittently, began to fail more drastically, as if the ship itself were being affected by some external presence. He sat at the control panel, his eyes fixed on the screen, but his focus seemed to be elsewhere, on something he couldn't see. The sound of his heartbeat, quick and irregular, echoed in his ears. He forced himself to concentrate on the task at hand, trying to ignore the growing sensation that something was getting closer. Suddenly, a muffled metallic sound echoed through the corridor. Andrews froze. The sound, coming from somewhere deep within the ship, reverberated through the walls, followed by a faint vibration, but one that was noticeable. The ship shouldn't be making these kinds of noises. He knew that. The technology was old, but still functional enough that it shouldn't be producing this kind of random activity. He stood up suddenly. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt the need to check the corridors. The feeling of being followed, of being monitored, was stronger than ever. With every step he took, it felt like there was an echo, as though something was following him, something was behind him. As he moved through the ship, the air seemed to grow denser, colder. He passed by a maintenance room where tools were scattered on the floor, as if something had passed through in a hurry. The lights flickered at shorter and shorter intervals, and the sound of Andrews's breathing mixed with the electrical malfunctions. He glanced quickly to the sides, but nothing. There was nothing visible, nothing he could identify with his eyes. Yet the feeling of something being there didn't fade. On the contrary, it seemed to grow stronger. The pressure in the air was more intense. Each time he turned a corner, the space felt tighter, more claustrophobic. The ship, which had once seemed like an abandoned void, now felt alive, but with a life he couldn't understand. Something that was present without really being there. He hurried back to his control capsule, locking the door behind him once again, but the relief he had hoped for didn't come. The feeling of being watched continued, stronger, as though the ship itself were against him, as if the walls were closing in, as if time itself had warped, and the very essence of the place was turning into an enemy. The ship system suddenly began to emit a low siren, a repetitive series of beeps. It was an alert, but for what? The radar showed nothing. The sensors were silent. Only an empty alarm, a warning for something he still didn't understand. Andrews looked at the ship's panels, searching for any kind of answer, but there was none. The lights began to flicker faster, almost as if the system was completely failing, until suddenly a shadow appeared in the corner of his vision. It moved quickly, and for a moment he almost believed he saw something pass between the cables and the ship's structures. But when he looked directly, there was nothing. He swallowed hard, and panic started to set in. Something was inside the ship with him. It wasn't just a feeling, it wasn't just fear. Something real, something physical had moved there. But what? What was it that he couldn't see, and what more could he do to protect himself? The answer seemed clear: run. But he knew the ship was damaged, and any sudden movement could ruin everything. Still, the fear had already taken hold, and with the sense of being pursued, he had no choice but to prepare for the worst.